Thank you. Oh, there's nothing on the screen now. I mean, there's something on the screen. It's okay. Mhm. Do you have an HDMI cable that reaches here? I mean, to my computer, you could do it too. Hmm. Mhm. Of course not. Does Patrick know technology? Yeah, thought so. Yeah, don't get her near technology. There we go. Okay, good. Thank you. Although that's not the slide, but let me escape. I can't get out of this now. Oh. So nothing's changing. It's the wrong screen sharing. Hang on a second. No, this is not working. So, um, sorry, people on Zoom. We're trying to get the projector to project the slides. Uh, no, I lost my connection with Zoom. There's the right one, but it's small. Hmm. I see. Well, if it's I think that's there you go. Oh, see, you guys are smart. It takes only takes three of you, but okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry about the delay, but it is what it is. Um, okay, so one thing to think about for a moment is just to get the mind settled and change remember we talked many times about intention is always there in our mind, even when we're asleep and in comas. So we had an intention, intentions have been driving us all this morning and even into this class. And now if you just set your intention that most intent, 99, all intentions are generated, just produced a temporary result. You know, like if you have the intention to drink a cup of coffee, then what you get is a cup of coffee if you're lucky. And then, so here we can direct the intention, like it's kind of like if you're going to medical school, your intention is I need to finish medical school so I can practice medicine, help people, that sort of thing, right? That's what we're doing. Same thing. It's the exact same concept. So the intention of being in this class and throughout our life, actually, but in this class, then the idea is that we will learn something that'll be helpful for generating and developing a more um, balanced mind and a mind that a mind that is beneficial to ourselves and beneficial to others in a long-term sense. So, it's like we're often looking to benefit our minds anyway. I mean, everything we do is to benefit our mind, really, isn't it? But it's all very short term. So the idea here is just the hour and a half or how much time we got left here, that these intentions ripen in the future as a way of developing a very balanced, not just balanced mind, but a very awakened mind. And we've talked about that a little bit too. Okay. So the title of the class, as you know, is The Myths We Live By. I think sometimes people drop in. I don't know who's on Zoom, being here or not being here. But the myths we live by, the reason the title is the myths, because from a Buddhist psychological point of view, the intention again is to develop a really healthy mind, a fully healthy mind that doesn't degenerate into like we always do. We're healthy for a few minutes, few days, whatever, but we don't have control over the healthiness. It's kind of like it's like anything for most of us can set us into unhealth or an unbalanced mind or disturbed mind. So, in seeing the challenge in a Buddhist sort of awakening approach is that it confronts most of our common thinking. And as we said many times in this class, once you start thinking about these ideas, it's sort of hard not to not think of them. You can block them for, a period of time. But once we understand that what we face, the normal uh, style of our normal lifestyle is in question when it starts becoming juxtaposed with this idea that we can actually attain some highly awakened state. So a lot of what we need is we do focus a lot on education. We have to re-educate, but that doesn't really change the mind. What changes the mind is therapy. What kind of therapy? What's Buddhist therapy, right? So So, of course, because this is a psychological approach to generating a more healthy, more full, more awakened state of mind, of course, there's going to be techniques and a philosophy on how to do that. Otherwise, it's just theory. And a lot of people, it's interesting today, or maybe always, is that get very hung up and very attached to the theory. And it's like study, 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 but where's the change? And change, as I said last week, I listened to my teacher, one of my main teachers, Lama Yeshe, is that change doesn't happen just by reading a book or listening to a talk. Change happens through um, Someone's there. Is it locked? Hmm. Okay, is it it's open? Okay. So change happens through application, and it is a matter of work, I mean, it is a matter of effort. Okay. It is a matter of effort. And if we don't apply the effort, not much will change. And we wonder why it hasn't changed. I think that traditionally in spiritual practice and not spirit, but religious practice, then the practice, um, some ways, some ways can be a bit shallow or superficial, not very deep. I mean, that's kind of a judgment, but it also can be, of course, very deep. So we ended last, I don't know if we ended, but this is the last slide I had up here. And the idea, the fundamental concept and practice in Buddhist approach is to um, change the mind and understand the nature of reality. That's no other religious, or maybe in terms of Hinduism, they also talk about moksha, liberation, and I'm sure all the religions have an idea of this liberation. They do have. Even within the Christian sort of superficial or shallow approach, about just getting to heaven. But heaven in that context is liberation, right? The concept is freedom from one's problems. Okay. Um, so the freedom from one's problems, or at least, the idea that you can attain a higher state of being is common to all religions, I think. I haven't studied them all, but I think that's the idea. So in terms of Buddhist thought, the problem for us Westerners sometimes, or it's also a good thing, is that Buddhist approach is not really, it's not faith oriented. It's not faith based. So in some ways we could say, is it even a religion? Is it more of a science? Is it more of a science than a religion? And I would say it's both, and also it's what we make it. Um, that's the beauty of Buddhist thought, is that it's not limited to just one narrow approach. It's designed. There's so many teachings and applications and interventions. There's 84,000 we say. So in 84,000 you find some that are applicable to everyone, anyone. Okay? Yeah. And as we talked about, that when Buddhism moved around the world throughout the millennium, then it adapted to cultures. It didn't make cultures adapt to that. The cultures, whether they're faith oriented, then they would find the more faith-based teachings, um, and would use those in there. So these myths that we live by. So we have to be really clear that in why this is essential in Buddhist practice is that I don't know if we hear it in other systems of thought. Um, Other systems of thought. So like all religions, Buddhism is focused on for a person to attain happiness. In this case, it's long-term, permanent kind of happiness, eternal happiness. And so it's incumbent upon us, or that we know not only where we're at. So this is why Buddha taught the first noble truth first, the truth of suffering, because he felt unless we understand our condition, our situation, we're not going to really make a movement to get out of it. you know. And it is true that if we think about the most motivating factors in our lives when we are trying to improve ourselves, it usually comes from some sort of pain or struggle that we're in, doesn't it? You think about when you really make an effort. When things are going really well, we tend to lapse into that and sit within that really, really content place, temporarily content. So the myths we live by is the fact that we do have this potential of full awakening. We do have it within us. It's in our being. It's not like some Buddha sitting there. It's a potential. So it's not actualized yet, but it's a potential. If we don't know, first of all, we don't know that there is such a thing as, attaining a transcendental state within ourselves that's lasting and liberating and much more satisfying and happy than what we live in. If we don't have that idea, if we don't have the idea that this is not so great, It's not so great. And I can go into that too, why it's not so great. I try to decide whether to come in with the depressing approach or the uplifting approach. I'm not sure which would be best. Maybe we need more depression so we get motivated. Anyway, so we have to have this foundation that there is a problem. Okay, there's a situation that we're in that's not ultimately our potential, not even close to our potential. A lot of people don't want to hear that because then we work so hard at our career, we work so hard at our family, we work so hard at education, we work so hard at our jobs, and then to hear that, well, yeah, that's great, but it's not it. It can be disarming, right? Buddhist approach is not for everybody because it's pretty kind of brutal. It's very in your face, very, very in your face. I think most what we do is we don't want to have things in our face. We divert. It's too painful. So one of the main myths, so what's keeping us in this sort of situation? And I know a lot of us haven't even thought about the situation we're in. So I'm making some leaps here because I don't have much time. And I want to present these different ideas. And maybe in the future, we'll go deeply into them because that's what it needs. Each one of these myths needs, a couple, 3, 4, 5 weeks to investigate. And what also in Buddhist therapy, I use Buddhist, but it's a Sanskrit word. I could use awakening therapy. In awakening therapy, if we understand what that means, then uh, there's three components that we focus on. There is what we call, well, the traditional word is listening because they didn't have books, but it's study. So we have to have study. In other words, what are we going to do? Then the second one is contemplation. Contemplation in this case does not mean meditation in our traditional sense of the word, okay? Contemplation means mulling over the thoughts, talking about them, debating with other people. In our tradition, as Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's a very strong component of contemplation and study is debate. It's very formalized debate, but very rigorous and very dynamic. It's not like the debate between Vance and Walls. We don't call that a debate. That was a discussion, right? Of some sorts. No, debate here is very dynamic. If you get a chance, I'm sure you can see on YouTube the monks debating. Sometimes they do it all night. They get so into it, and they're debating philosophical ideas. Okay, and it's really fun. And there's not that many books translated on debate. There is one or two. Uh, I don't know. The ones I've seen, they don't. For me, they don't read too well. They're a bit too academic in a sense, um, but the idea is that contemplation. So it's not just reading about these ideas, these different myths. And we have, thousands and thousands of pages of commentaries and what Buddha wrote, said, and that sort of thing that helps. Now we have so many books out. So it's not just picking up the book. That's the first important thing. It's also being able to contemplate. Also, sometimes it's very helpful to have study groups because that's really where the contemplation can become more in depth or have, anyway, an approach where, and then contemplation also does include thinking, of course. It can include a deeper, more subtle sense of thinking when you talk about contemplating. In fact, a lot of the meditations we do that are guided meditations are really contemplations. Okay? So contemplation can become very deep, just like study can become very deep. But the third one is the one that trains the mind or changes the mind. And that's what we call meditation. So to clarify for meditation, meditation has become sort of a catch-all for anything you do. I don't know. What would it be? Close your eyes or focus, right? But, and they could be meditation. I'm not disparaging them, but really what meditation we would say in Tibetan word, if I translate it correctly, I think it's a direct translation from Sanskrit for dhyana or samadhi, I think dhyana means to become familiar with. Interesting. Never would think if you ask someone what is the definition of meditation, I don't think we'd ever come up with to become familiar. But that, if we remember that, and then when you're meditating, doing your practice of meditation in this tradition, if it's not a process of becoming familiar with, then in our context, this is not real meditation. And then also, when we develop the meditative mind and develop single point of concentration, our goal is to develop a single point of concentration, like all the meditation traditions probably, is to develop focus. But the goal is not focus. And that's what's different. The goal in many meditations that I've seen that are taught is become more and more focused. Now, of course, why does we do accept that, but if you think about your experience with meditation, if you've been to classes and stuff, it seems that's the goal, right? Develop really good concentration. But in Buddhist, this is therapy, right? Buddhist therapy and meditation and contemplation and study are the three aspects of therapy practice in this psychology or this philosophy. And if we think about it as becoming familiar with, so let's say I want to become familiar with this topic that we're going to today is the myth of the self. Okay. The myth of the self is a close friend of the myth of reality, which we've been talking about these last couple weeks, haven't we? Were you online? No. Okay. There's Chase. Someone was online. Chase. And so the myth, so this is one of the myths. This is sort of pretty close to the grand myth. It's one of the parts of what we call the grand myth. And the myth again is we see something that isn't there, right? In a myth, part of what a myth is like we're almost hallucinating something that isn't there, and we believe it's there. And so it's a myth, right? Um, in terms of meditation, so it's a tool for us. It's very, very important for us to remember it's a tool and not a goal. And by the way, many, many great Buddhist yogis and meditators get stuck because there is a process of developing what we refer to as single pointed concentration. And I'm just talking technically now. So technically, in one approach, the main approach is that you go through 9 levels of depths of concentration. And you can get one of the manuals and you can see where you're at. Many might not want to at first. First step is like being able to watch your breath 20 times or something without wandering, or doing a half a rosary of Mani Padme or something. It's like very, like, sometimes hard to even do that, right? But the mind gets trained. That's the beauty of it. And actually, as you train the mind, when, I don't know what level, but you get to like the third or fourth level of development, it can take a long time. It can take weeks or months, but you stick at it, you do get there. You definitely get there. And then it's interesting because when I think it's the fourth level of the 9 levels in developing single point of concentration. Fourth level, when you might like go through a period where you don't have time to meditate, or you're working, or get involved in life, and it might even be for a year or 2 or 3. When you go back to your practice, you can go very quickly back into that third or fourth level. And every level, really, first, second, has a cumulative effect. This is really, really, unless you really, really, really screw yourself up, then you might take a little longer to get back there. But the beauty is it becomes part of your makeup. Sometimes there are meditators or practitioners, they go into retreat to purely develop go through the 9 levels of developing single point of concentration. And some can do it in a matter of 7, 8 weeks even. It depends on our previous imprints, our familiarity, You can see in people, they develop the single point. Now, just I can't leave it there because it's not actually, I should give a complete picture. So those 9 levels, one's concentration is becoming so profound that some of the signs are that you can say single pointedly focused on your object for 4 hours. That's one of the signs of attained single point of concentration. So your body is not an issue because the mind is so quiet, so focused that there may be things happening to the body. Like when you finish the meditation, it could be you have some, maybe you have some aches or something. I don't really think so. Actually, it's not true because as you develop the mind's, sorry, I caught myself. So as we develop these 9 levels, there is a bodily component as well. So when at the end of the 9th or when attaining the 9th level, that's not the goal in this Buddhist therapeutic approach, because actually the goal is to attain what's called calm abiding. Okay? Calm abiding happens after these 9 levels. And I'm not going to go into that because that's a whole class, right? But just to say that, we're not just, the reason I'm making that point is there are other spiritual traditions that develop these 9 levels. They may not call them 9 levels, but they develop this single point of concentration. But they don't go to the one step further, developing calm abiding. Okay? It's the calm abiding we need to thoroughly demyth the myths. Just single point of concentration won't do it. Just to give an idea, when we're developing a single point of concentration, I'm not talking about calm abiding yet. Things like you can sit for 4 hours, your breath almost stops, your body becomes very light and pliant, your mind becomes very light. You develop clairvoyance, for example, because, as I said in a previous class, clairvoyance is not really a big deal because all the information is there. It's like computers. They can access information now, right? They can, right? I mean, like about the weather. We couldn't access that data, but it was always there. But we just didn't have the technology to access it. So in the same way, the mind is far more, it's unlimitedly potential. Its unlimited potential is to, we can't even, it's just so fascinating to read some of these books about the qualities and the potential of the mind. So not only can it develop these 5 clairvoyances, but also there's a 6th one that's developed that's only in the unique sense of once you start chopping away at these myths, particularly the myth of reality. Okay. Anybody remember the definition of reality that I gave at some point? Anyone online? Zoomers? No. It's a really helpful definition. I know it's technically a definition, but so we say that the nature of reality is that what we see or perceive, right, is the way something exists. Everything else is a myth. Okay. Now, when we see how something exists truly, and that's what we're trying to figure out today and last week, then you see all the myths, and because you see all the myths, that's also an awakened perception. It's a little bit, well, no, it's like we're in an illusionist show, David Copperfield or David Blaine, one of those, if you've ever seen, these guys are amazing. But anyway, especially David Blaine. Have you seen David Blaine? You seen David Blaine? It's like, how does he do that stuff? You know? I think he has a lot of assistants or something. I don't know. But anyway, when when we're captivated by what David Blaine might be doing, we just see that suddenly somehow a little flame of fire is lit on a glass. Have you seen like he's in a restaurant and he's on the outside of the restaurant and somehow a little piece of fire, the glass lights on fire on the inside. Okay, so that's the way we see the world. But his assistance or him is very clear. So when we have a perception of reality, we still see that flame on the inside of the glass, but we know how it's done. So it's not that it disappears. It just has the full context of what it means. So when we have a perception of reality and the primary object of our discovery is the nature of our own self. And it's kind of sounds very heady, but it's not like that. Because when we think of self, we think of the soul, the Atman, right? We think of the Buddha nature, all these ideas, you know. Uh, but what we mean by self is exactly what we're feeling right this minute. You don't feel you are her, do you? You feel you're you, right? You feel you're you, right? You feel you're you. You know, you're sitting, you know, I'm sitting here. I'm not sitting there, right? Who is that? Right? Both you guys, we're all just like in our independent universe, aren't we? So so when we think about, and also the people online, you're in your little box there on Zoom, you're in your universe, right? See, I'm here. And it seems to me that mostly, I mean, this is the holy grail, I guess you say, of Buddhist thought. And we're not, I mean, I think that modern day psychology talks about a lot about the self, you know, certain different ways, personality, right? You're dealing, when you go into therapy, you're dealing not so much with the body, you're dealing with the mind, right? But the conception of the mind, the conception of self is not really at all understood in my point of view. It's not understood correctly. So if we think so, you know, depending on one's personality, one's point of view as a therapist, psychologist. So if I think the self, so if I think that, um, if I think you're an addict, I'm defining yourself, aren't I? And not intellectually, perceptually. So someone comes in and they're struggling with alcohol. Depending upon my idea of a self, I'm going to think of how that applies to that person. What if so for example, someone comes to alcohol, struggling with alcohol, and I see this person, and there's another therapist has a different model, sees the person a little differently, don't they? So I see the person, oh, it's, you know, the problem is your family upbringing. So the self then gets that my perception of that person, just make it that way. My perception of that person who I'm going to talk to, that's the self, okay? And that's not the real self, but that's the self I'm identifying that person as. So if the person presents as struggling with alcohol, if I'm an alcoholic, how do I see the person? It's okay. Let's go have a drink. So I have a perception of the self differently, don't I, of that person? We always are looking, okay, we're are seeing people's bodies, of course, but we're kind of like we're trying to find them as a personality, aren't we? It's like a personality. That's him. That's her. I have to help her. I have to help him. And who's the him or her I have to help? That's we can identify as a perception of their self, personality, identity. Now, that is important, but when we talk about the myth of the self, we're really talking about our own identity. Because for me to work with that person and see that person that way, also is a reflection of how I'm perceiving myself, isn't it? Does that make sense? So, so uh, depending on how I see myself, like it's like my father, I remember, he's a very kind man. He was a businessman and he was a very sensitive guy. And but when we'd have, you know, we started going through the 60s and stuff and looking at uh, different kinds of discussions we were having because of the 60s. And we when you would try to have a political discussion with him, he would always approach it from a logical business approach, business point of view, because that's how he thought of himself. You know, I mean, of course, he thought of himself as a father, he thought of himself as a dad, he thought of himself as a swimmer, you know, volleyball player, businessman. So it comes down to this idea of how we think of ourselves. Okay. And that's false. Okay. So what? What does it matter? Why does it matter if we don't see ourselves as we really are? Why does it matter? Anyone have an idea? It's to see others as they really are as well. I think if we see ourselves as we really are, it extends. Yeah. But what's the problem with not seeing ourselves as we really are? Or why are we so, why is Buddha so focused on that? So we can change. And then we can't change if we don't know that, right? We can't change if we don't know the problem. And then we have to also somewhat identify there's a problem, right? It's why that we say that in certain realms they can't practice spiritual path, like God realms. Now, forget about God realms and think about people on this planet who have everything they want materially and live a really, sort of a very comfortable, lavish, I don't know, lavish, but they have no struggle. It's very hard for them sometimes to get involved in these ideas. It's weird. It's just do a little research. It's the people who have feel problems, who feel the struggles of life that are much more akin to developing a spiritual practice. The other ones are, it's like, well, why do I need to? I don't, right? They feel good. Or people who use a lot of drugs or something, their mind, well, feels good in a sense. Um, it blocks that there's a problem. And then they say, well, things are really problematic. And they say, why are you trying to make things worse? Why are you trying to depress me? Why are you trying to upset me? And these kinds of things. Then from Buddhist answer to that is, well, your problems are never going to stop. And even if you have this lifestyle or this happiness or this peacefulness now, it's not going to last. And when it doesn't last and when it does go away, it's going to be worse. And you're going to have nothing to work with. You have no equipment, no tools. So this self-identity, yeah. So it's about making problems for ourselves, right? And the curse is that you begin to study all the problems we have. And it's like it was like when we were when I was getting my master's degree in clinical psych. I think I mentioned this before that, 1 year, there's one of the classes is 2 semesters of psychopathology. And you study all the different mental disorders, the 293 of them or 73 or whatever there are. And each week you go through different classification. And so that week, oh yeah, I think I do have a mood disorder for sure. Because you're studying about depressive disorder, dysthymia, these various things. Yeah, I think. Then the next week, you're studying personality disorders. Oh, that's my problem. I have a personality disorder. And those can't change, so I'm doomed the rest of my life. Okay, and then you're depressed for a week until you go to the next one, which might be psychotic disorders, and then you go, okay, yeah, I think I remember, being a little psychotic. God, you go through. But until you have an appreciation of what a problem is, so I meant, in the book I wrote, The Misleading Mind, and I've told this, I think, in this class, the first class, I talked about this guy, Benny. We were playing golf, and he told me, he read my book, and this guy's, I mean, it's so funny to hear him say that because he's ultra right wing, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but just not the type. And I said, well, you read my book? He said, yeah, yeah, I read your book. I said, well, I'm surprised you bought it. He said, no, no, I didn't buy it. I just went on Amazon, and it says, look inside this book. He said, I just read it. I said, but you can't read the whole thing. I think every other page is blocked or something. And he said, yeah, but I got the idea. And he said, what is it with you Buddhists? He said, you're talking about suffering, pain, struggle. He says, I'm not suffering. And I really did think, I thought, oh God, I didn't express it well because he didn't get it. It was, I took it on as my fault. I didn't express it. I didn't put it right. So I was walking down and he says, yeah, I don't have, I don't know what you're talking about in that book, but you Buddhists, it's problems, suffering. So I'm not suffering. And we get down there and he starts complaining about the group ahead of us going so slow. Then he goes off on, because I said something about climate change and he went off. There's no climate change. Then he tells me that all the water's been cut off to his house because of a broken main. And he's talking about how at night he goes home alone because he's been married twice, divorced twice, and he doesn't have any wife to nag him, so he can just watch his sports. But he's having a hard time. He has a scotch or two in the evening, but then he falls asleep, and then he wakes up the next morning. He's kind of groggy, doesn't play good golf. I said, yeah, you have no suffering. And I thought I didn't express it right, right? It's all about mental unbalance, mental unhappiness. You know, um, I guess he didn't know. Well, but if you don't know that there's an alternative, then you can't blame people, right? So the idea is to give this alternative, not just talk about suffering, but to talk about what we can achieve and what the potential are. And in this process, in this system, it's the achievement is in the mind. Okay. And it's achievable in this life. At least great strides, great achievements can be made in this life, if not full achievement. Okay. That's the fundamental. If we don't express that and share that with people, then we can't blame them for not understanding. Otherwise, it's just intellect, isn't it? It's just, or even just feeling. So this self-identity, and I hope this is not too technical because I want it to be practical too. So to get an idea that we're talking about how you feel right now in your body and your mind, and you say, that's me. Okay. You don't have to get too philosophical about it. That perception of ourself is a myth or is incorrect. And that is the cause of every problem. And that's also the block from identifying with who we truly are. Because there's not that we're not something. We're all here. We exist. We're not going to, the goal is to become non-existent. A lot of people think that nirvana sounds like non-existence, and it is expressed that way in some philosophical teachings, in the Buddhist teachings. And in the what we refer to as the Hinayana school, the southern school, lower school, Theravada, it is part of the understanding of that approach is that when you attain nirvana, you disappear. They call it nirvana without remainder. And as one of my teachers says, who wants that? It's like, what? Doesn't well, makes sense, but it doesn't, it's not something you would, why seek annihilation? So that's wrong. That's an extreme wrong view. And the other wrong view is what we hold. The opposite of annihilation, we sometimes refer to as eternalism or positivism or realism. That's where we live. And it's so hard when you have friends or people or clients who are suicidal because the belief is that annihilation is the result. And it feels, and you can understand why people would feel that way and believe that way, but it unfortunately is not. You know, when you're so depressed and so desperate that you want the only thing you can look, and so much pain. The pain is unbelievable, of course, but you just want to be free of the pain. But the problem is in our point of view is because the consciousness is eternal and it changes moment to moment. So killing yourself doesn't kill the consciousness. It's kind of like having a lot of problems and getting drunk one night because it feels good, but you wake up in the morning, the problems are still there. So when this state of mind that is extremely profound is sort of the opposite of our state of mind. That's, I guess I would say it. But it's still a state of mind, which means it's still our mind. It's just undeveloped. For example, one way we can think of it is that some Buddhist psychological texts talk about the 51 mental factors. They are. Don't worry about tech. I'm just showing this one slide sometimes. So 51 mental factors means that forget the body. We know we have a body and we have a mind. Essentially, we're just those two things. Okay, the person, us as people. So in the mind itself has 51 categories or functions. This is just one schematic. It's a popular one, but you don't have to get hung up on it. So if you look at this, the 51 mental factors, what we talk about is there's 11, there's a mental, well, there's a 6 root afflictions. Okay, so if you can, I wonder if I can do all 51. The 6 root afflictions are things like anger, attachment, ignorance, doubt, wrong views, and blanking, pride. Thank you. And pride. And so those are considered the 6. Now it doesn't, now sometimes talk about 3 root afflictions of anger, attachment, and ignorance. But in this schematic, it's 6, right? So there's 6 root ones. And then they talk about 20 secondary ones. So those are all, subtle manifestation, or, like, well, like with pride, let's see what, envy is a secondary mental factor that probably is linked with pride, right? Um, Thinking about shame or embarrassment are probably aligned with, might have been pride, could be attachment. So these 20 secondaries, that's why it's 26, I think. But then there's also five mental factors that are always there. They're not good or bad. We've talked about them in the past. Things like contact. You need to see something, perceive. They're all with perception. Contact, feeling, attention. Okay, things like that. There's 5. Okay, so every perception has these 5. Well, you have to have these 5. So I can't see Frank if there's not some contact, right? My eye organ has contact with your shape and body. And then also the intention is the 5th one, attention, intention. So I don't have any, if there's no intention to look at Frank, there's no looking at Frank. But if I look at him, and it's not a conscious intention, my mind is moved to look at you. And then my mind also has to tend to you for a moment, right? And then there's contact, right? Between my eye organ and your body. And then there's also feeling always arises, a sensation. So I shifted and I looked at Isabella, same thing, maybe I have a different sensation, which then the sensation leads to other things. Okay. So those 5 factors are always functioning. There's 5 others that function when we're meditating, and they also some texts say they're always functioning too, 5 more subtle factors. And then there's 6 consciousnesses too. So we don't just have our mind kind of is segmented. It's not physical, but there is a consciousness that sees you green dressed, okay, right? Your brown shirt. So my eye perceives your brown shirt, right? It's there in my, but that's not perception. Perception doesn't happen without a mind. So we talk about the eye, EYE, eye consciousness. So the eye consciousness sees your shirt. And then as I'm listening to the projector over here, right? That's not my eye consciousness. That's my ear organ, which is dependent upon an ear consciousness. Get it? Same with smell, taste, tactile. And then there's a mental consciousness, a mental, it's not a sense organ, but a mental, for example, when you dream at night, your mind, there's a perceiver of the dream, isn't there? So there's a function going on. So the dream is the object, just like your shirt is the object of my eye organ, eye consciousness, right? So when I'm seeing a dream, it's not my eye, it's the mental consciousness and the mental organ, they call it. I don't really like that name, perceiving the dream. So the dream is the object. The mental organ, for lack of a better word, is the ear, so to speak, or the eye, the organ. And then the consciousness is a perceiver. Just like with eye consciousness, the eye consciousness perceiver. This is the mental consciousness perceiving mental phenomena. Why am I talking about this? Huh? Why though? It's just this intellectual stuff. Dependent arising. So these are what make up the mind. Okay? this is one description of how the mind works. The mind, definition of the mind we talked about is something, the mind itself is clear or luminous and cognizes or perceives or experiences. The space here is clear, but doesn't cognize, so it's not a mind. And minds are only in sentient beings. They're not in boxes of tissue. They're not in the computer, by the way. AI does not have a mind. Yet. And by the way, minds are not created anew. Okay? All the minds that are created have been created since beginningless time. Who created them? Who created all the minds? Do I know? I know an answer. I don't know if I know. That's not fair. I had to struggle with it for years. Do we each create our own? So it's like, who created all the minds? Well, I've asked you. I mean, I have to ask you. Now we're going off track. Does the mind have a beginning? How many say no? How many say yes? Okay. But there's no other option, is there? How about online? Does the mind have a beginning or not? How many say beginning? It has a beginning. No one? Do I have to silence them? Unmute them? Yeah. Mine has a beginning or not? What does Marilyn say? Okay, she's not unmute. Oh, I can unmute. No, it's okay. Oh, well, it says asked to unmute, which I did. Okay, it doesn't matter. It either has to have a beginning or not. And according to most theories, it has a beginning. Right? What does Christianity say? What does the Bible say? What is it? You come from God? You come from your father? Adam and Eve? Yeah, right. So it has a beginning. Yeah, right. Yeah, so it doesn't, because Buddha is very logic based, it's also perceptual. It's not just logic. This is the experience of meditators. You can't find a beginning for the mind, which is very, very disturbing for us. It just you become like untethered almost, right? It feels, but let's just not focus too much on that because that's, we'll get lost in that. But let's just work it. But we need to, if it had a beginning like God, what created God? Because God is creating. So he's also an impermanent phenomenon, isn't he? When we say impermanent, it means cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect, cause. So if you have some point where, like, the effect is my consciousness, let's say it had a beginning. So the effect is I became something, right? That was the first effect in this thing. Can you have an effect without a cause? These are things we debate about and think about, but you cannot have an effect without a cause. Even science. Can you have an effect without a cause? I mean, they're mutually dependent, aren't they? So what's the cause of my effect as my conscience comes into being? What's the cause of that? Well, the cause of it has to have a cause too. Because it produced, right? If it's not producing, it's permanent. It doesn't move. It can't produce my consciousness. And if it is moving, then it's a series of cause and effect. So it's endless. I know this is stuff that is, I mean, I don't, it takes a long time to look at this, by the way. It's not fair for me to really bring it up. Is it? What? If you're what? Right. Yeah. So if in a still lake that has no ripples, all of a sudden the ripples create, you have to observe outwardly what's creating, but you could use inference, your logic, right? At the very least, you may not know what caused the ripple, but your inference and logic will tell you something caused it, right? You
Mm,
can't It
mm.
can't arise from nothing. And we're not doing the myth of randomness today, or maybe if we do this class again, we'll go there. But the myth of randomness is where we live. That happened randomly. Okay, my mind was created randomly. God created or whatever, or the universe, the Big Bang. Maybe I came out of the Big Bang. Why was I doing this? Okay, so the myth of identity, that's why I want to get back to that. Okay. So let's go a little bit. Mm, okay. So let's close our eyes for a moment. Just do a little contemplation so we can get refocused after all that. And then what I would like you to do, just count your exhalation on your breath, not forced, just natural, to 10, and then backwards from 10, 9, 8 to 1, and then I'll lead you to another, just to get settled for a moment. Develop awareness of the self that's sitting here, yourself, your identity. Just, it's always there. Just look at it for a moment. Feel it. I'm here, right? I'm here. I'm not there. I'm not him, her. I'm here. I'm me. I'm me. You can even say your name if you need to. That is a sense of self that we always, awake, sleeping, are catering to, trying to fulfill, trying to satisfy, try to protect that I, that self. Really get a strong sense of it. Like you can almost look at it. Now we need to get to know this self because we never study it. We never study her. We never study him. Ever study it. What we study is the things that upset, disturb, and make happy. So we're looking at a good cup of coffee. We're looking at a friend. We're looking at someone that's disturbing us, something that's disturbing us, the weather. We're constantly outer focused on the objects. Now we want to focus on the subject. Very clear. Subject. Who is this?
Mhm.
When we hear sounds, we're focused on the object. But who's hearing the sound? Who's experiencing it? I am, right? I'm experiencing. So it's that I. Just turn the attention around to looking at that I. So the first discovery, the first question, first observation should be that this I exists independently. We believe it to exist independently of everything else. Okay, see that. It's like I'm here and everything else is there. It exists, appears to exist independently. I'm here, everything else is there. Even my thoughts are there, and I'm here. Because when we're feeling anxious or sad, we say, I'm sad. But I must be perceiving sad. So it's two, not one, right? But that I feels independent and yet says I'm sad or I'm anxious or I'm tired. So I and tired must be separate, must not be the same thing. Otherwise, how could you perceive it? Now, what is that? Now turn it around and look at that I that says that. Who is she? Who is he? Where is he? Where is she? And see that a strong sense that is acting as if it's independent. It's important to get a feeling for that. Again, I think I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm bored. Doesn't matter. The misconception here that Buddha is trying to teach us is that if there's an I and there's an object, then they're separate, aren't they? How can an I perceive tiredness if it was oneness with tiredness, or oneness with sadness, or oneness with joy? It's a trick. It's a myth. Now, one other element to look at. Again, look at the I. You can say, you can bring up an emotion or something like that. Like, I'm anxious, I'm excited. What does it matter? Instead, now turn the focus onto the I again, the self. And this time, see that it appears to be something unchanging, we call permanent, unchanging. It seems very, very unmoving. You get appreciation for this. It doesn't matter intellectually what you think. That doesn't matter. It's what it perceives by default. And by default, this I is seen as something permanent, which means unchanging. See if you can perceive that quality that we're all hypnotized by, that I really believe myself is unchanging. Get a feeling for it. You might see that things change around us, but I am not changing. That's how the feeling is. That's the perception. Solid. Solid. Unchanging means permanent. Impermanent means changing moment to moment. We can see that things around us, even our mind, is changing moment to moment. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your sense who you are. I am this. That I am this appears unchanging, solid. Really feel it, really see it. And finally, see yourself walking around in your world, even from your birth up to now, or even today, tomorrow. When we walk around, it's only I walking around in my world, as in I'm the center of the universe. At least I am the center of my universe. It's very important to get that sense. That perception is the self, and it's a wrong perception of the self. It doesn't exist that way. It never has existed that way. And yet we've almost never, ever seen it differently. We're hypnotized by the myth of the self as being unchanging and independent and monolithic and having no parts. Solid, inherent entity. Okay. So, did you get a sense of that? Something? So when we talk about this process, this whole spiritual path, whatever you want to call it, this whole therapeutic path is about understanding that dynamic, understanding that it's an hallucination. And this takes a lot of years, a lot of studies. So I don't want to I don't want to trivialize it. This is not something that you do once. This is the whole thing. This is the whole thing, really. All the other practices in this Buddhist path are really pretty much designed to help us get to the perception of reality. The perception of reality, as I mentioned, I think before, only includes two objects. So you don't have to get so confused. So the primary object is this sense of I, this sense of self. That's the primary. And the other is all the other objects of phenomena in the world. Okay, it's only two, the subject and object. If we get attain an insight in the nature of reality of the self, we can then transfer that on to start looking at the nature of the reality of this. It's not a cup. What is it? What is this thing? Thermos? Uh, thermos is what you used to take to work with you when you in Nepal we used to have thermoses too. All right, what's on? It's a thermos mug. What is it called? It's a Yeti. Yeah, there you go. It's a Yeti. So I don't see, the perception of this Yeti is as incorrect as the perception of myself. That's the idea. It's everything is seen wrongly and in the same way. So it's a weird way of saying it, but we do talk about the identity of the Yeti. It's weird. We don't say that typically in English, right? But same way we talk about the identity of me, we see all objects having an identity as well. In the same false way, we're just talking about the identity of the self. We see this mug. Can I call it a mug? Hey, I see this mug as, look up there, independently. So I see it existing right there, right? You do too, if you're like me. And you also see it, if you're like me, as something solid, right? You don't see the, you don't see, this is not actually solid, is it? I mean, I wish we had some, well, in terms of physics, there's very little solidity to this mug, isn't there? Does people know this? I don't know. I'm not a science person, but I read a little bit. You know that what percent of this mug is space, for example? Yeah, 99.99. But we don't see that, right? We see this something solid and unchanging. That means permanent. Do you see, is this mug changing or not? No? No, I didn't ask that. Is it changing or not? I know how it seems. Yeah, so we don't see reality, do we? The atoms and molecules are moving millions of miles an hour, or whatever the correct description is. Isn't that the reality of the mug? And it has space. Why can't I put my finger through it? Can I not put my finger? Well, I mean, really, if we're, and don't press me because, like I said, I'm not a science person, but technically speaking, or reality speaking, I should be able to put my finger through this, right? Why can't I? I believe I can't. It's a perception. The thing that's stopping my finger from going through is mental, not physical. Physical, we know it's mostly space. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched to think that when the yogini is practicing and developing his or her mind to these high levels of concentration, we say, for example, in the very first level, not this levels of concentration I was talking about before, but the very first level of a someone who's has a direct insight into reality. So when we're talking about reality, we're talking about the emptiness of solidity. Emptiness, you always hear the word emptiness, but we shouldn't say emptiness. Like I'm meditating on emptiness. That sounds like um, nihilism. I'm meditating on nothingness. Should think emptiness of the inherent existence of this cup, empty of the independent existence of this cup, empty of the solidity of this cup, not just emptiness. I think it's unless you already know what we're saying, then you can start talking about emptiness and you can use the word emptiness. But really what she's be saying is emptiness of what? Of coffee? Emptiness is not a familiar concept. So it's the emptiness of inherent existence, meaning existing the way it appears. It's empty and then you say it's empty of of existing the way it appears, and you can ask, well, how does it appear? What appears is independently, it appears solidly, it appears inherently. Inherently means it is that, has an inherent existence imbued in it. So Buddhism denies any inherent existence. There's zero inherent existence in the universe. And we see ourselves as inherently existing too, don't we? And we're going to believe that. So the meditator who has, when we start grappling with the lack of inherent existence, or emptiness of inherent existence, or emptiness of independent existence, or emptiness of the solidity of the cup, or everything, the self and phenomena, Then so we develop insight. Now that concept at first that insight is conceptual. It's with a mental image. It's what conceptual means, you know. But eventually it's direct. Just like you directly perceive the mug, one directly perceives the emptiness of the mug or the emptiness of the self. When that happens, which is only the first level of 10 levels of the bodhisattva or the awakening being. It's only the first level of the awakening being, and the rest of the levels may take eons to traverse. You're never going to go backwards at that point, by the way. You are continually going to ascend through those 10 levels to eventually become a fully awakened being or a Buddha. That first level, that being, which all of us can attain this life, I think, uh, perceiving the direct perception of the emptiness of inherent existence, that person at that point can then, one of the things you attain is you're able to walk through walls because your mind doesn't see things as solid anymore. It sees them as they are. I know it sounds far-fetched. Is it physically possible? From scientific point of view? Doesn't seem like it. But what about in science? I don't know. I tell you, like quantum physics tells that most of it's space. If most of the solidity is space, if most of the wall is space, why can't we walk through it? In theory. I mean, it's possible in theory, is what I mean. Isn't it? We have to have good scientists here and then someone who can debate with the good scientists. That wouldn't be me. Well, that's what we do all the time. Through perception, it exists, Isabel is saying. Through perception, it's solidified. That's what we do. So, yeah. So, because, yeah, I'm going to show you one more slide. Not that one. If I can find it. There. So we're always perceiving, right? And, but when we're doing the little contemplation there, the idea of independence is very important to understand. So I perceive the mug as existing independently, don't I? Just like the self, but let's not take the self right now because it's the same process. So it really, we spend a lot of time becoming very familiar with seeing things, how I see things, how we see things incorrectly. Before, we never thought about it. Okay, yeah, of course, the mug is independent of you. It's not in your, body and mind. So this is the fundamental misconception for us and why we don't. So in reality, if we see reality, we don't see this as independent anymore. Okay? We see it as dependent or interdependent. Because in my experience of this mug, I have a consciousness somewhere in my mind, right? In my mind. And I have an eye organ, right? But I also have there's the object. So we put all the value on the object. It's there. But the perception of this object, because we don't see things truly, we see them as independently. But if I saw them as dependently, which is what's really happening, where is the experience where is the sight of this mug? Yeah, it's in the brain or in the mind, right? That black and the silver plastic top, the circular part, the shape, right? There's a perception, and I think it's there. But actually, the perception, we never, well, this is according to, in terms of Buddhist psychology, we never really experience anything fresh. We experience the mental image of it, which happens right after, which is really kind of weird then too. Because if we really saw things truly, we would see, the meditator can see that process. He or she can see the mental image arising. and also can see the bare perception of it, because there is a bare perception. Bare perception, important to understand, is not, it's not also not reality. Because when we see it barely, we're also seeing it incorrectly, but it's valid, right? We say erroneous, but valid. Because a mug, it's black. But how it is what we see wrong. And so wrongly. And so this process, the meditator or the awakening being does see everything as interdependent. Okay, we call it dependent arising. It's constantly arising through causes, conditions, right? But we don't see anything that way. And that when we start experiencing the nature of reality, all of a sudden you start seeing all that stuff happening, those functions. You see the mind's involvement, you see the cup's involvement, you see the eye organ's involvement, and not intellectually. It's just one has a perception of all these dependent arisings. You also see things arising and falling away because that's how they are. Right now, doesn't everything appear permanent right now, unchanging? I mean, intellectually, yeah, but yeah, so that's wrong. That's not even the nature of reality. That's just a byproduct of it. Seeing things as impermanent is not seeing things as in reality still, ultimate reality. Wow, I didn't mean to be so intellectual today. I don't know if it's helpful or not. Oh, so the helpful part is why we're talking about all this stuff is to live our life better, right? So when let's see, when I'm upset by something, and it could be also, not upset, elated or something. But let's say upset because problems. When I'm upset by something, the occurrences of life, because they happen all the time. If I were to see this process, that process, if I were to perceive all the interdependent qualities, there's many factors. With this little schematic up here, that's not all that's involved, right? Because there's other things like there's always a sensation, because those five mental factors, one of them is contact feeling, and then a sensation of agreeable, disagreeable, or neutral. So I see something out there. There's this interdependent thing about the eye organ and the eye organ and the consciousness and the object. Well, all those are acting, but there's more interdependence. The other part of interdependence is I'm getting a feeling from those. I'm not aware of it or sensation. And then I look and the sensation triggers something in me. It's not an agreeable one, it's a disagreeable sensation, right? And then I have all those mental factors going that are latent in my mind stream. And then due to past experience, which we can call karma or mental imprints, it activates a feeling of well, it's a disagreeable sensation, but that is not so bad. But what happens is that can't stay there, it explodes. And then we kind of go and like, I hate that thing. I hate being this. And then might go further that you might be and then start having some behavior around it. And that's what we call life. And everything that's happening there, we see as independent, inherently existent. We don't see anything as interdependent. It's all a play of interdependence. So we're slaves to that. But when we see it is when we begin to unravel it because there's alternatives. Once we can't apply the alternatives very well until we see what we're in. We have to really study it, and it's painful sometimes, or ugly, or difficult. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I don't know if this is helpful. There's a lot of more myths we can explore if people are interested in. Then let Isabel know or LMB know, and maybe we'll do something in the future. And then to think that for a moment, anyway, whatever we did, we shared time together, we strengthened our connection together. And because of interdependence, these imprints are definitely going to ripen someday. And my own wish is they ripen in a way that fully awakens our minds, all of our minds, and why also for our own happiness, well-being, but also to benefit others. We can't benefit others if we're a mess. So the idea is to get out of our mess more and more. And this does create non-mess. Not only that, we have many qualities of our mind, in our mind, like compassion, equanimity, nonviolence, non-hatred, things like that. Those are 11 mental factors of the 51, but they can't activate very well because they're dominated, overwhelmed by the negative ones. So as the negative ones subside, the positive ones just automatically start to rise, and then we can cultivate the positive ones like compassion, non-hatred, equanimity, and so on. Non-violence. There's 11 of them. Okay, they're just very, very weak in a lot of us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karuna.
Thank you. See you.
More classes, please.
Okay, talk to the authorities.
I will. Thank you.
I just work for them.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.